Welcome to the Albany Book Festival online, presented by the New York State Writers Institute at the University at Albany. You can learn more about the festival and find direct links to independent booksellers at our festival webpage, albanybookfestival.com. Follow us on social media and hear from more videos from the Writers Institute.
Welcome to this year's Albany Book Festival at the State University of New York at Albany. I'm Mark Koplik, Assistant Director of the New York State Writers Institute. We're excited to be here today with Cree LeFavour and Dwight Garner. They're both brilliant writers. They've been married to each other for 25 years. It's a treat to have them together today on, I believe, separate floors of their current residence. Cree LeFavour is the author of the widely acclaimed 2017 memoir, Lights On, Rats Out, a powerful and intimate account of her battles with mental illness and self-harm as a young adult, and a testament to the power and slow benefit of therapy, even in the face of the most challenging personal pain. Cree is also the author of a first novel, Private Means, published this year. It's an astonishing window into a troubled marriage, a marriage beset by boredom, resentment, loathing, empty nest syndrome, midlife shenanigans, infidelity, and even a bit of violence. It is not, I repeat, not based on her marriage to Dwight Garner. In another interview, she says that about 7% of it, that's a single-digit percentage, 7%, is based on their lives together. It's a dark comedy of manners about a privileged, overeducated white couple. It's very much about Manhattan, but it's also about vacation getaways to a geography that many of us in Albany know well, the Berkshires, Vermont, and the Hudson Valley. You can find out a lot more about the book, Private Means, here on this website. You can also purchase the book from an independent bookseller right here via a link on this page. Dwight Garner is a name that you probably know. His book reviews in the New York Times, Esquire, and Salon.com have helped to shape, more so to curate, the reading experience for many of us. His reviews are a reading pleasure, characterized not only by sparkling intelligence, sensitivity, and generosity, but an impossible richness that brings together relevant quotes and voices from other books, music, and film. His reviews and columns often feel like a conversation among writers and the best conversation in the world. Cree and Dwight, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks, Mark.
Thanks for having us.
A question for both of you, but first for Cree, how do you overcome inhibition, your own internal censor or critic? And how do you deal with your own internalized Dwight Garner, the critic that you share your life and your personal space with?
So great question to start. I'm definitely going to take it as two questions because they're very separate for me. When I wrote my memoir, which is, I think one of the descriptors was intimate in your description, and it really was a ripping off of any kind of Band-Aid about what was personal and what was private. And in order to write that book, I absolutely had to be, I'm going to call myself fearless. Like I just couldn't care what people were going to think. And in fact, it turned out to be terrifying and yet incredibly liberating to just decide that what I was going to put down on the page was going to be the truth as far as I could see it or know it, and to sort of disregard any sort of idea that I had that this was embarrassing or this was shameful. And so once I did that, I really ripped that Band-Aid off with that book. And so for the novel, I could just have a great time because A, it's a novel. It's not my life for a change. And I just realized that, I don't really care. I think you kind of have to maybe decide that you really don't care if people are going to judge you for being disgusting or cruel or small-minded or whatever, sexual or whatever else you want to think. I guess you just have to decide you don't care. that it's human beings, and we're all kind of that way in our deepest, darkest ways. I think humans are pretty dark, so I'm happy to go there. As far as the critic down the hall or up the stairs in this case, Dwight Garner, I had to also really pull that Band-Aid off with the first book, because it was hard for me to feel confident as a writer of cookbooks. And that's sort of a whole nother story we don't need to go into right now, but I've written a lot of cookbooks, and my background is in food, and yet I felt like I was at the kids' table. So I kind of wanted to really write a book that I took very seriously and that I put my whole sort of put everything into. And if Dwight wasn't going to like that book, then I was just going to have to deal with the consequences of that. And I felt like I had to do my best. It's not easy, but I don't show him my work as I go on longer projects. I keep it until after my agents read it in general, and he doesn't scare me anymore. I think I've gained enough confidence as a writer. Sorry for how long-winded that was.
Great. Dwight, are you impeded in your own writing by yourself as a critic, or are the writer and critic somehow at odds or at war with each other?
Oh, it's a good question. I mean, absolutely impeded. I mean, when you read books all day, you think to yourself, and, so many books just aren't that, to use a kind of cruel word, necessary, and a book critic, I think, thinks long and hard about bringing another book into the world that maybe doesn't need his or her book. And your standards get pretty high. My standards for prose, I mean, I don't think of myself as a literary snob, so to speak. I mean, I've read a lot and I like all sorts of writing, high and low, vernacular, not so much. But when you read words all day long, every day, your standards get high, and sometimes you don't even meet your own standards.
Is it important for you to be generous as a critic? And how can students develop that impulse if it is important?
Well, the greatest feeling a critic can have is discovering new talent. I mean, that's just the reason we're all doing this, And so you wake up every day hoping to be generous. But, not every book is that good. And part of the critic's job is to bulldoze the landscape to some degree to make room for the good stuff to grow. And that's the thing. One way of being generous is, I think that the critics who think of themselves often as generous are the ones who seem to like everything, and they're not so generous because no one really trusts what they have to say. And so you hope every day to find things that you love, but that's, some days are grayer days.
Right, so you're both writers and readers of each other's work. I've gotten that impression. And how does generosity come into play in your relationship with each other as artists, as writers? Is that difficult to negotiate? Do you nurture each other as writers?
I'm going to jump in. Oh,
go ahead.
You beat me. I was going to say that I think Dwight is an incredibly generous reader of my work. He can't lie, and yet he wants very much to, I feel like, be supportive. So I'm not sure how it would look if he really didn't like my two books that we're talking about here. But I think Dwight is a really generous reader and a really generous mentor to people who are trying to write without being dishonest about that. What were you going to say, Dwight?
No, about the same thing. I was going to say too about, I don't show Cree all of my work, because when you're a working critic, I write a lot of pieces for the Times, and Cree has her own life, and I don't expect her to read all of my stuff before it goes in. But I do take reviews to her where I'm worried about an issue or something that I think she's particularly smart about, which is many things. But once in a while she's warned me and said, I don't think I would say that, Dwight. And in every case, she's been right. And the one or two times I've not listened to her, she's been absolutely right. And I regret, not massive regrets, but there were a few things that I wish I had taken her advice on, and I didn't.
Is there any relationship advice in that for you? You guys have been married for 25 years. Is there any relationship advice implicit in that for young people, young artists, young writers?
We're such different writers, Mark. Like we're really not. We don't work in the same method. We don't sort of progress down the page in the same way. Our sensibilities are really different, but I feel like Dwight is really great at seeing outside of his own purview and the kinds of things that would come naturally to him. we leave each other alone a lot. We're both kind of loners, and we're both really independent. And we both, I think we depend on our own kind of internal critic more than we do on each other or some other person outside. I don't know. I shouldn't speak for you, Dwight. You speak for yourself.
No, I think that's smart, but I think that we're both honest with each other in a careful way, in a helpful way. I mean, the things that your friends and your loved ones don't tell you about your work before it goes out are often the things that come back to haunt you. And you need to count on your friends, and you count on the people who love you and your family to tell you things that they feel about stuff you've written. So it matters to be honest, which doesn't, honesty is not synonymous with cruelty in any way.
So that was Maybelle barking, I imagine.
That was Maybelle. I'm going to pull her up here so that she doesn't bark anymore. Maybelle's the star of Private Means, so she gets to have a little cameo appearance here. Here she goes. All right, now she's going to be quiet. That's the mailman.
So, Cree, you just wrote a piece in LitHub on the limitless pleasure and value of rereading the books you love. How can students put that into practice? Is it more important for them to read widely at this early stage of life, or should they return to the beloved books that they already know?
You know, I think it's that, I love it the way you put that question. I think it's really important about stage in life, because I have, as a 54-year-old, I have recently started rereading much of the books that I haven't read since I was in my 20s or earlier. And I was a big, voracious reader. As a late in my teens, well, really all my life, but like in my teens and my 20s, I read a lot of books that I go back to now and see very differently. It's almost as if I'm reading them afresh. So I guess I would I think young people should read widely and voraciously, unless they really are feeling sorry for themselves and really down and they need to go visit a very favorite book again, which I find incredibly comforting, which is why I think during the pandemic, I've just been going back to my old favorites because it feels so good. I get a lot of comfort from rereading those books that it literally is like visiting a favorite place and a favorite person, you know? So yeah, that's my answer to them. I'd say go wide now. There's lots of time to reread.
Dwight, do you have time to return to the books you love, or do you have to keep swimming and eating books just to stay afloat? And is there anything lost in having to read so much all the time?
You know, I do. I'm working on a project now that involves a ton of reading. So I'm doing some outside reading. I'm working on a food project about food and literature. It's complicated. I won't go into it now. But I'm reading a lot of books that have to do with food. And so I do find the time. Although as a working book critic, some weeks are more difficult than others. Some week I may be reviewing the first book of poems. And, you know, even if you read it 3 times, it may only take 2.5 hours to read 3 times or 2 hours. Other weeks, I'll be reviewing a novel from a person who may have a long career, and maybe it's the first time I've reviewed them, and I'll feel the need to go back and reread the previous 4 or 5 books, and that can be a 3,000 word week, you know, as opposed to a 60-page week, and so it just fluctuates. But yeah, I do find time. I mean, I'm a word eater. It's what I do, you know, and I like to reread. I just reread for this food project Harry Cruz's 1975 novel Car, about this man who eats a Ford Maverick, and I had the best time reading that. So yeah, I do find the time.
And are your reading lives shared? Do they overlap? Do you discuss books, or is that something that you do as loners? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, Cree. I'll hop in and you take over. We're very different in the sense that when we met, Crees bookshelves were filled with the great Europeans and Jane Austen and Trollope and these writers. And I've been an American largely in my reading since I was younger. That was just my thing. And I've certainly read other things, but our book collections almost don't overlap. It's really fascinating. Behind Cree right now are mostly my books, by the way. Hers upstairs, you would just see piles of Henry James and Trollope and you know, George Eliot, and I'm not sure who else, but we do talk about books a lot. Cree, what do you have to say?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Our tastes are quite different. Dwight reads a lot more nonfiction than I do. And yet I will read an important book that I feel like he's discovered, or sometimes he'll come across a novel that he just is, I can tell his energy level is really high with, and I'll grab it and read it. Occasionally he'll throw a book my way and just sort of say, what do you think of this? So yeah, we do. We talk about books, and, you know, we talk about, I mean, yeah, we're different, but the same in some ways. Yeah. Yeah.
So Dwight has talked about the pleasures of keeping a commonplace book, a place where you record the best quotes from your reading that you would like to return to and carry with you into the future. Dwight's reviews often read like a commonplace book, and it makes for an incredibly rich reading experience. Do you advise students to keep one? And any practical recommendations for doing this that aren't obvious? And of course, I'd also be interested in whether Cree keeps a commonplace book as well.
Yeah, I've kept one for a long time. I mean, I'm in my mid-50s. I've kept it since I was probably 15. So it's been, 4 decades. And it started pretty small. I would just, when I read, I'm a big underliner. And I have a practice that when I'm finished with a book, I'll flip back through it and write down the things that I've underlined in under sections. So they weren't sections always, but they are now. So my commonplace book is quite long, but there'll be sections for food and social class and sounds and weather and global warming and all kinds of aspects, arguing, conversation. And I also keep words. I mean, there are times as a writer when you're searching for that perfect word. I mean, John Updike said he never used a thesaurus except that he was writing about the color of people's eyes, and a lot of times you want these words. You'll be writing about the weather or the sunset or something about the clouds, and you realize that I'm missing this word. And I'll go to my commonplace book and I'll find that I've written this word down about clouds that someone used and I just really liked it, and now it's my chance to use it. Now, the downside with doing this is readers can often tell when a word doesn't belong to you. Readers can tell when you're kind of putting on the Ritz a little bit and you're just, flying higher than your station, than your prose says you should be flying. And so it's always, you always want to be careful about quoting too much or using a lot of words for the first time in print. But it just comes with learning, it comes with feel. And I realize that I do overquote, I think sometimes, and I'm trying to pull back, but I happen to like writers who quote pretty often. They're tend to be my favorite writers. So it's just a habit that I'm into. So.
Yeah, no, it makes for an enjoyable reading experience for me. And Cree, do you keep a commonplace book, and what role does it play in your life? And would you encourage young people to do the same?
I don't, but I keep a file. Dwight is incredibly methodical, I should add. He makes it sound pretty casual. Well, maybe he didn't, but to me, sometimes he can act casual about the method, but he's really, really disciplined about keeping those files and those quotations and all his notes from a book. And in fact, he ruins books every time he reads them because he underlines so much that no one else with their own brain can go in with all that kind of textual distraction going on. So it's a real problem for me. So even if I want to read a book Dwight's just reviewed or something, I have to get my own copy, quite literally. I keep notes when I'm working on a particular book. So I'll have a file going with thoughts about that and possibly quotations or words. And I enjoy that process so much. And I really miss it when I'm not working on a book, when my brain's not like churning on a book. I can tell my book is going well if I'm just constantly thinking of things for the book.
So I am going to bring up food. Crees, a great food writer and a finalist for the James Beard Award, the most prestigious award in food writing, for her book Fish, 54 Seafood Feasts. Dwight recently published an amazing essay in the Times on breakfast, which he calls the least analyzed meal. Can both of you share any advice that you may have about breakfast for students living in the dorms with micro fridges and hot plates and grabbing the meals in the cafeteria?
I love those.
Or are studying remotely at home with parents and siblings and barking dogs in the background?
All right, I'm going to jump in. Don't underestimate the power of a soft-boiled egg with butter and salt and pepper. Like, anyone who's not made a soft-boiled egg to perfection, so just the white is cooked and the yolk is really beautifully running, and put butter in the bowl when you scoop it out with the spoon, just the best thing with a piece of very buttery toast. Also, never underestimate the power of toast itself. My daughter keeps a sort of a an ongoing sort of file of photos of the toast she eats. So that's my 2 cents. And I'm also a big egg sandwich fan, so anyone can make one of those.
And do you eat before you write, or do you eat while you're writing, or after you've written some in the morning?
You know, I don't eat first thing. I tend to work, like if I'm working on a book, I usually write in the morning, and I'll drink lots of coffee while I'm doing that, but then go hit the breakfast around 11. Yeah. So get a little work in, get a little hungry, and then go in for the breakfast.
Dwight?
Well, it's interesting. Cree and I come from very different food worlds. I mean, her father was a well-known chef on the West Coast. She grew up eating, really well-prepared foods. Not always super fancy, but very meticulously. Her father raised his own vegetables, had his own ducks, and sourced snails. I mean, this really serious food life that she had growing up. I grew up in West Virginia. I grew up eating, fried bologna sandwiches. And so we come from these really different places. And I've been obsessed with food and reading about it since I was very young. And she's in a way in flight from her foodie, I hate that word, but she's in flight to some small degree from this food past. She's a little, I wouldn't say she's over it, but she's, I want to talk about it all day. At breakfast, I want to talk about what's for dinner. At dinner, I want to talk about what's for breakfast. And Cree is not the same kind of person always. So we have this kind of dynamic that's interesting. But yeah, I wake up very early. My reviews are due every Friday morning to the New York Times. So I tend to get up at 4 in the morning because they're due around 10, 4 or 5. And I'll work for 3 or 4 hours, then have a quick breakfast, then go back to work. But I find that early mornings are by far the best time to work for me. And no, I don't think it's smart to eat first, but whatever works for anyone,
So a couple of more questions. We're coming up on time. This has been really wonderful. I think you mentioned in a recent interview that your kids moved back home. Is that the case or not the case? If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine too.
No, it's totally fine. Both our kids are finishing college this year.
Really?
So they're both stuck in this online. Both of them got sent home to study online last spring. And we managed to have them both home here where we're living in West Virginia for about a month, which was an incredible treat. And I think it has been for many parents with empty nests, which we're kind of qualify as that. Yeah, so I loved having them home. It was amazing. Yeah.
And any advice? I mean, this may be watched by students who have similarly been sent home or who have not actually left home. Any advice for them on family harmony and peace and survival and?
Well, I declared it a no judgment zone at the beginning of the pandemic, the whole house. So if anyone needed to watch Netflix all day or eat candy bars for lunch or breakfast, then that was totally okay. And no one needed to feel judged for napping, after getting up 2 hours earlier. So I would say just be kind to everybody and realize that your parents are human beings too, and they're actually got used to the house by themselves. And it's maybe clear your plate. You should say that, Dwight. What's your advice, Dwight?
No, I don't know. We all get along pretty well. I mean, I would just say, it was hard for us all to read during the early months or so of COVID. It was really hard to sort of have any kind of focus. And I think, at least for some of us, that focus has come back to some degree. And I would just say, it's a time not to waste. I mean, these years, if you're a young student, I would just encourage you. I like to tell my kids ABC, always be carrying. And that means a book and not a gun. And, those little times in life when you're waiting, I mean, we don't go out as much to wait in line for anything, do we, at the DMV, but have that book with you and not your phone. And you'll be surprised at the extra amount of reading you get done if you're just reading in small amounts during the day. Rather than just waiting for a big moment to sit down with a book. No, find those short periods of time in the car or whatever.
And one last question for Cree. What's it like to bring a book into the world at this strange time? How are you experiencing the current nature of your book tour and your connection with readers?
I mean, we've done a couple events, as you've noted. We did McDally Jackson had us for the opening day. And it's a little sad. Let's be honest. I miss being in a bookstore, as we all do. I miss being in a bookstore with an event where I can actually see the faces around me and go out for drinks afterward and laugh and talk and have a genuine interaction with readers. And so it's a little strange, like a lot of things right now. I recognize that I am very fortunate to have a book coming out from a great press like Grove. And I feel really grateful for that. And I think they did a beautiful job with the book. So I'm trying to look at the pluses. It's not a great time to have a novel come out, though, let's face it, so what can we do? I think you end on that note.
The book is Private Means. It's available on a link on this screen. Strongly recommend it to you. Anything we missed that you want to talk about? Anything you'd like to say in closing?
Buy my book. It's coming out in November. It's like my commonplace book.
Right. And the commonplace book, that's a focus on food, or that's not the one on food?
No, I have a book coming out from FSG in November called Garner's Quotations, and it's an unusual quotations book because most quotations books are sort of, I think, skewed to the upbeat and the sort of classic "a penny saves, a penny earned." My quotes tend to be very downbeat about things like hating people and hating yourself and vomiting, and so it sort of flips the whole notion of the genre over a little bit. So anyway, keep your eyes open.
Cree LeFavour, Dwight Garner, thank you so much for coming to the Albany Book Festival. And we look forward to your book coming out, Dwight.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
This book festival is made possible with the support of the McGuire Family Endowment at the Writers Institute, the University at Albany Foundation, the Office of the President of UAlbany, the Peacock Family Foundation, the Capital District Library Council, Stuyvesant Plaza, Chet and Karen Opalka, Charles Toohey and Alice Green, Pernilla Dake, Elizabeth Ruthman, and Betsy Lopez. If you appreciate our programming and would like to support the Writers Institute, you can find out how at nyswritersinstitute.org.